Hello, I'm here to review another notice in the Federal Register. The Federal Register is the official daily publication of the United States federal government. It is where the federal agencies and the President formally publish rules, proposed rules, notices, and presidential documents such as executive orders and proclamations. Today I'll introduce the notice of availability, receipt of recovery permit applications for endangered species, and request for comments. This is, let me make sure I get the right number here. I might have put the wrong number down. Double check. This is Federal Register number 91FR39117-39119, which is Federal Register document 2026-13053. I want to hear your feedback, thoughts, questions, or viewpoints about this. So leave a comment below. But the purpose of this is to get you to comment and send comments in for the actual notice. The publication date was June 29th of 2026, and the author or signatory is Sean Marzin, who is the Acting Assistant Regional Director of Ecological Services Region 3 of the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. The contact party is Nathan Rathbun. His phone number is 612-713-5343, and his email address is permits r3es@fws.gov. If you look up this document, if you go into your browser and you type in endangered species, if you type in the citation, the 91FR39117 through 39119, and write down Endangered Species Fish and Wildlife Service notice and Federal Register, you should get right to it. Okay. The purpose of each week, I review selected items from the Federal Register so everyone gets a no BS literal interpretation of what they are really doing and what the other government officials have said. I'm Malcolm McCallum. I hold a PhD in environmental sciences and have over 30 years experience teaching in higher education. As an environmental scientist, my role is to research, educate, and inform about how the world of humans and the world of nature interact. This interaction is called the socio-ecological world that we live in, and we're linked to both our human world and the natural world. The overarching purpose of this field called environmental sciences is to protect everyday people from the natural world from the rich and powerful. So I believe that just by explaining what news items appear in the Federal Register, I will be informing everyday people what the government is really doing if they are working for you or someone else. Remember to hit the like button and subscribe so you will always be in the loop with what they want hidden by distraction campaigns on TV and radio. You can subscribe at the end of the video, there's a little icon, a thumbnail on the screen that you can click, and that'll subscribe you to this channel. So as I already gave you, usually I wait until after I go through my introductory blurb, but I already gave you the contact information to provide comments for this notice. In summary, this notice invites public comment on the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service applications for recovery permits under Section 10A1A of the Endangered Species Act. With limited exceptions, the ESA prohibits take meaning killing, of listed wildlife species, either directly or indirectly, by the way, unless federal authorization is issued via a permit. Recovery permits allow otherwise prohibited activities when those activities are for scientific purposes or to enhance propagation or survival of the species. The applications include new permits, renewals, and amendments for work involving endangered and threatened species across multiple Fish and Wildlife Service regions. The listed species include, among others, Hawaiian waterbirds, Mariana island birds, Fender's blue butterfly, the Kootenai River white sturgeon, gold-cheeked warbler, southwestern willow catcher, Jemez Mountains salamander, Hungerford's crawling water beetle, freshwater mussels, rusty-patched bumblebee, northern long-eared bat, pallid sturgeon, black-footed ferret, tidewater goby, Quino, I don't know how you pronounce this name, it's Quino, checker spot butterfly, the Lost River sucker, the California tiger salamander, and fairy shrimp species. The notice gives the public, local governments, state agencies, tribal governments, and federal agencies until July 29th, 2026 to comment. So you have roughly 3 weeks to make your voice known about this. And you'll need to go on to the Federal Register and look at some of the details because this is many species involved. So how does this change policy? It doesn't actually change policy. The notice does not change the the Endangered Species Act, Fish and Wildlife Regulations, or National Endangered Species Policy. It is procedural. It announces that Fish and Wildlife Service has received permit applications and opens the required public comment window before the Fish and Wildlife Service decides whether to issue, renew, or amend those permits. If the permits are granted, the practical change would be a case-specific, so in any one of these, or in all of them on an individual basis, named applicants would receive legal authority to conduct activities that would otherwise be prohibited because in some way the organism is probably going to be either manipulated or killed. Those activities can include capture, surveys, handling, population monitoring, tissue or genetic sampling, disease swabbing, captive propagation, captive rearing, banding, tracking, and radio telemetry. So these are all conservation things. The permits are being requested to implement conservation programs in order to try to help these organisms survive. So the policy framework says this stays the same, but the particular applicants may receive project-specific authority for recovery-related work. The rationale for the notice is grounded in the Endangered Species Act. Fish and Wildlife Service explains that Section 10C requires the service to publish notice of permit applications in the Federal Register and invite comments before issuing permits. The service also states that the most useful comments are those supported by quantitative information or studies. In other words, they don't just want you to call and say, I don't like this, or I like this. If you have information that is meaningful, it is you've done a published study, or you have worked on the organisms, or you in some way have real information that can contribute to whether or not these permits should go forward, then you're encouraged to submit it. They really are not looking for stuff like, I don't think we should do this, just opinion. They're not really looking for opinion, they're looking for information. The conservation rationale is that the recovery permits generate information and allow management actions that can be essential for recovery. Fish and Wildlife Service describes the recovery permit data as valuable for land acquisition, land management, Section 7 consultations, recovery plans, and downlisting or delisting decisions. Without these permits, Fish and Wildlife Service says knowledge of listed species abundance, stability, resiliency, habitat needs, geographic range, and disease would be more limited or even impossible. So when we look at the political viewpoints involved in this, it is important to know that I could find no comments about this by any local or regional or state politicians. And that's not really a big surprise because this appears to be mostly for research applications for conservation. It's a technical procedure, and it's something that people do with the Endangered Species Act regularly when they work with endangered species. From a democratic conservation protection framing, Democrats are more likely to view this notice as part of the scientific and public participation infrastructure needed for species recovery. Current House Natural Resources Committee ranking member Jared Huffman and other Democrats have defended strong Endangered Species Act protections, opposed rollbacks, and emphasized that the Endangered Species Act has prevented many species from extinction. On January 16, 2026, Huffman, Debbie Dingell, and Don Beyer and other Democrats demanded the withdrawal of proposed Trump administration rules that they said would weaken the Endangered Species Act. This viewpoint would likely support recovery permits when they are scientifically justified, transparent, and protective of animals and habitats. A Republican or reform and state management framing perspective is a little bit different. Republicans are more likely to support recovery science than question whether the Endangered Species Act is too slow. Republicans are more likely to support recovery science but question whether the Endangered Species Act is too slow, litigious, centralized, or burdensome. House Natural Resources Chairman Bruce Westerman introduced the Endangered Species Act Amendments Act of 2025 and argued the Endangered Species Act reforms should focus on recovery, permitting, streamlining incentives, accountability, and limiting litigation. Representative Harriet Hageman similarly described ESA reform as a way to empower state and local wildlife management and reward successful species management. This viewpoint would likely support necessary recovery permits, but ask whether permitting is efficient, whether recovery criteria are clear, and whether state or local managers should have more authority once recovery progress occurs. It's important to recognize that some of these ideas on both sides of the aisle are not realistic. First of all, when you're talking about endangered species, a lot of this stuff you can't actually just come out, write a little letter and say, hey, this is what's going to happen. These are highly stressed out populations of organisms that are on the brink of extinction, and there's a lot of unpredictability. So, it is reasonable that where these kind of streamlining and recover and things like that can be done, of course it's very important, but sometimes because of the nature of the natural world and dealing with it, these things appear to be haphazard, and it's really because you're dealing with the randomness of nature rather than a structured legal or structured business environment where everything can be predicted within a reasonable time frame. The issue is not purely partisan. Many Democrats support science-based endangered species recovery. Many Republicans also support wildlife recovery, but want more flexible and incentive-based Endangered Species Act. I think that some of the incentive-based ideas are not out of this world. I mean, if you can help individuals or companies do the right thing by incentivizing them, all the better, in my opinion. But that is my opinion. The disagreement is usually over how much federal control, procedural review, litigation risk, and land use restrictions are necessary to achieve recovery. And as we know, if it's your property and you're a private landowner, it always feels like there's more, it's infringing on your rights more than it should, and that really isn't the case in a lot of cases. In some cases maybe it is. It depends on a lot of factors. There is scholarly and technical background on this. There's evidence supporting the need for strong endangered species recovery and permit-based science. The ESA has substantial evidence of success in preventing extinction. There's no question about that. But there are many species that if you take a whale, for example, a whale's generation time is so long that it takes a long time to recover that species, to get it to be back in a healthy situation. Meanwhile, some organisms like a little woodlouse or something may not take very long at all. Things that tend to have lots of babies very rapidly and grow their populations up and can deal with a certain amount of inbreeding tend to recover much quicker, as opposed to things that are just the opposite. Greenwald and colleagues estimated that the Act prevented roughly 291 species extinctions and has saved more than 99% of the species under its protection. Evans and colleagues similarly concluded that the ESA has shielded hundreds of species from extinction and improved recovery over time, although recovery has been more difficult than originally hoped. And that goes back to the aspects of the natural world that you can't predict. The Fish and Wildlife Service also states that recovery permits are important because they generate data needed for decisions about recovery plans, habitat management, consultations, and downlisting or delisting. Evidence supporting the Republican-style concerns about efficiency and incentives also exists. The same literature complicates a simple success narrative. Complicates a simple success narrative. Evans and colleagues note that threats and persistent and pervasive funding is insufficient, and there is no question about that. The federal and state governments have been in a budget cut mode for over 30, well, really since the Endangered Species Act was set up, and it does cost money. You know, it's not something you just do just do for free. The House Republicans emphasize that only a small share of listed species have been classified as recovered and delisted, and that's because only a small portion of them may have been recovered and delisted or may require further protection in order not to unrecover. Economic studies have also found potential pervasive incentives under the Endangered Species Act. The perverse incentives, that is a very loaded statement there. Luke and Michael's work on the red cockaded woodpecker found evidence that some landowners may alter habitat before regulation attaches, illustrating why incentive-based conservation can be important. And again, that is absolutely true. Many years ago, I was involved in a state endangered species that was under consideration for going in the feds, and we met with the local NRCS and a lot of landowners, and the first thing the landowners did was get out their leveling equipment and completely destroy all the habitat. So, I mean, these things do happen. Evidence cautioning, and it would have been nice to have had some incentives for them, because I get what their problem was. These people weren't wealthy, okay? And they were worried about losing their livelihood, which wasn't going to happen, but they don't know that. Evidence cautioning against overly broad or poorly designed interventions also exists. Recovery permits can be essential, but they authorize activities that may stress or disturb individual organisms. Capture, handling, tissue sampling, disease swabbing, captive propagation, and translocation require expertise and oversight. Just any idiot off the street can't do it, just like any idiot can't fix your car, okay? The captive breeding literature is particularly cautionary. Snyder and colleagues describe problems with captive programs, including reintroduction, failure, high costs, domestication, disease outbreaks, and displacement of habitat protection. This does not argue against recovery permits. It argues that for careful permit review, qualified applicants, clear protocols, and continued attention to habitat and ecosystem protection. In fact, there is a big debate that occurs about captive rearing and reintroduction. Some of the foundations for the arguments against it are completely crazy. in my opinion. Some of them are very sensible. If they have nowhere to go, well, then the species is going to go extinct in the wild anyway. But then again, if you don't keep them existing, they're not going to be available to go back in that habitat if it is recovered. So there's a whole lot of issues here. There is a balanced interpretation. The scholarly record supports the need for recovery permits and scientific monitoring, but it also supports concerns about program design, funding, incentives, transparency, and species-specific risk. Recovery permits are most defensible when they are tied to clear recovery objectives, qualified personnel, strong disease and animal handling protocols, useful data, and public accountability. This is relevant to the socio-ecological system. It's probably a little more obvious than some of the others. The notice is directly relative to the ecological side because it governs the interface between human conservation activity and endangered species populations. The social side includes Fish and Wildlife Service, universities, consulting firms, zoos, state agencies, tribal institutions, conservation organizations, landowners, researchers, and commenting public. The ecological side includes listed species, their habitats, genetic diversity, disease dynamics, trophic interactions, hydrology, wetlands, forests, grasslands, caves, rivers, and coastal ecosystems. Recovery permits are the governance mechanism for allowing controlled human intervention in ecological systems. They authorize actions that may involve limited take of individual organisms in order to produce broader recovery benefits. In the socio-ecological terms, the notice is about how law, science, management, public participation, and ecological recovery are linked. The different cohorts of the there are different levels of impact on different cohorts of the socio-ecological system. The federal governance is moderately affected by this. The Fish and Wildlife Service is using the ESA Section 10 recovery permit process to authorize recovery-related work while collecting public input. Species recovery is potentially positively impacted because the permits can support surveys, monitoring, sampling, propagation, rearing, telemetry, and other recovery activities. Individual animals and organisms have mixed impacts. Authorized activities may involve capture, handling, swabbing, sampling, or relocation, which can stress individuals if poorly executed. The scientific knowledge will be positively impacted because the permits can generate data on abundance, distribution, habitat use, disease, genetics, survival, and population trends. Habitats and ecosystems are indirectly influenced by this, but it's an important impact nonetheless. Better species data can improve habitat management, consultation, restoration, and conservation planning. The public participation is positively influenced by this. The notice creates a comment window and allows agencies, tribes, organizations, and citizens to submit information. State, tribal, and local agencies definitely have potentially positive impacts. The notice invites their comments and includes some state and tribal affiliated applications or partners. Landowners and regulated parties have an indirect impact. Recovery data can later influence habitat management consultations or recovery actions affecting how land is used in the region. Biodiversity and ecosystem services have a potentially positive impact where recovery activities prevent species decline and preserve ecological function, which is very important because the ecological function is what supports us. Risk management has mixed impacts. The permit system can reduce risk by requiring review of qualified applicants, but hands-on interventions require careful animal welfare and disease protocols. The resilience of this entire socio-ecological system in which we live should have positive impacts from this. Science-based recovery activities help society detect, manage, and respond to biodiversity declines. The bottom line is that this is not a dramatic new rule. It is a technical recovery permit notice, but it is socio-ecologically significant because it shows how endangered species recovery often depends on carefully permitted and scientific work. surveys, monitoring, disease sampling, genetics, propagation, rearing, or tracking. The key trade-off is that limited regulation interaction with endangered species may be necessary to understand and recover them, but the permit process must ensure that such interventions are scientifically justified, carefully performed, publicly visible, and tied to actual recovery outcomes. So I'm done with this. Be sure to go to the Federal Register and look at this notice, see if it's something that concerns you, or you support it, or you have information that they may need to, that would be important for them to have when making the decisions on it. Have a nice day.